So to say a huge thank you for joining us this morning for the launch of Employers for Change's Inclusive and Accessible Communications Toolkit. For those of you I've not met before, my name's Claire Hayes and I'm a part of the Employers for Change team and the wider Open Doors initiative team. So just in the interest of inclusion and accessibility, I'll give a visual descriptor of myself. I'm a white woman. I have short blonde hair, just tied back quite tightly in a bun today. And I'm wearing glasses and I've got a red and white cardigan on and a white kind of polo neck. And I'm sitting in front of an Employers for Change background, which has the Employers for Change logo. And it also has the Employers for Change website on it and a kind of a purple kind of gradient. I'm also joined on screen this morning by Vanessa, who is our wonderful ISL interpreter. And I just want to say a huge thank you to Vanessa for joining us today. It's great to have her here. Just a little bit of housekeeping before we start off. Something that actually was brought to my attention that I wasn't quite aware of by a very kind individual. So the chat function on Zoom can sometimes, if an individual is using a screen reader, it can interfere. So if I was speaking and people are writing into the chat, the screen reader will begin to read what's in the chat and it can interfere then with that individual's experience with the seminar. So what I'm asking today is if you do have a question that you'd like to put to the panel, to ourselves about the toolkit, you can use the Q&A function, which is found in the bottom bar of your Zoom account or of the Zoom window here. Or instead, if you'd like to send me a direct message through the chat function, I can receive that and I can put your question to the panel later on. So we just ask people just to be a little bit mindful of that. And just to give you a sense of how today's session will be running, we have some really great guests here today that I'm so excited to be able to introduce to you. We have David Redmond, who is the content creator, digital content creator and technology trainer from NCBI. And we have Erin Fox, who is senior client executive from Jury. So both Erin and David will be joining us later on screen, and we'll be chatting about their experiences with inclusive communication. We're also going to be hearing from Jessica Reed, who is Open Doors in-house designer and expert in all things inclusion and accessibility. So she'll be sharing a little bit about the kind of practicalities about design. So I just want to say I'm absolutely delighted to see so many of you joining us this morning and engaging with this topic. We're looking forward to sharing the information that we've been working on and to be able to learn from the experts that we have. And we're really lucky and I'm very grateful to say that David's actually pre-recorded a demo for us, which will kind of show us the first-hand impact of inaccessible documents has on an individual who's using a screen reader. I suppose just starting off a little bit as well, I just want to give a little bit of context around who Employers for Change are. So we're a part of the Open Doors Initiative Collective. We're one of their key projects. And we're a disability information service, and we exist to support employers who want to hire and retain candidates and employees who have a disability. So we sort of do this in a number of ways. We go about by developing resources like the one that we're launching today. And for those who are interested in engaging with the toolkit, we'll be sending it out in PDF format either later on today or tomorrow, and we'll do that alongside. You can receive the recording of today's session as well. We also facilitate awareness training, so we'll be able to deliver training on inclusive communications and accessible formats after we've launched this toolkit, and we also run disability awareness training. We have a helpline as well for employers, so if you're an employer that's sitting here today and you have a couple of questions and you'd like to speak to somebody, you can give us a call or a text. That's on our numbers on our website, which is www.employersforchange.ie. And all the work we do at Employers for Change is underpinned by the social model of disabilities. So what I mean by this is that we look at the barriers within our systems and our structures that are disabling individuals, and we assess how we can remove these barriers. So rather than placing the onus of the responsibility on the individual, we're looking at how we can improve our systems, our structure, and our wider society. So this is a key underpinning for our inclusive and accessible toolkit. And we've developed this document with the support of the Open Doors Initiative designer, Jessica Reed, and she'll be able to speak to us shortly about some of the key design elements. At Employers for Change, we believe in practical and intentional changes when it comes to removing barriers for employees who have a disability. And one of the key ways that you as an employer or a teammate or a team leader or a colleague can do this is through the introduction of reasonable accommodations within your teams. So oftentimes when we speak about reasonable accommodations, I kind of find that employers are a little bit concerned over the cost or perhaps the impact that they can have on their business. But the reality is that we know from research that for the most part, reasonable accommodations cost an employer very little or nothing. In fact, they're actually really about practical changes in how we perhaps do a task, or for instance, reassessing how we can carry out a task, or offering communications, for instance, in an alternative format. So I'm actually delighted to be able to welcome Jess on screen now, who's going to share a little bit more about developing those alternative and accessible formats when it comes to communication. Thanks a million, Jess.
Hi, everyone. As Claire said, thanks for the introduction. My name is Jessica, and I'm just going to try and get this up as an actual slide. So just to give a visual descriptor of myself, I'm a white woman with long brown hair, wearing a black top, and I have a blue and green open doors background behind me with our logo up in the top corner. So basically today what we're talking about is accessible and inclusive communications, and that's a really broad area, because we're talking not only about your internal communications that you might do within your own company or organization, but we're also looking at the marketing, the promotions, and everything that your brand and your company puts out to the world, to your customers, your potential clients, and how you communicate yourselves to the world. So there's a lot of different aspects to this. So what we're going to be looking at is just a very quick overview, and then we've developed a more thorough training program that we're going to be rolling out in the next couple of months that we would encourage companies to take part in, to get a little bit more of an in-depth understanding of this area. So we'll be sharing further details about that, and of course the actual toolkit itself that will be available for everyone. So what I'm going to start off with is, it's just important to kind of understand the different types of barriers that people might face when they're trying to access your communications, because there's a lot of different considerations to take in mind, and different people have different needs and will have different barriers. So if we're looking at someone that has low sight or vision loss, they're going to might have issues with things like printed documents and publications. Websites that are inaccessible, especially ones that require a lot of mouse usage versus being able to tab between content. Images without descriptions, because it basically means they lose out on an entire part of the content of a piece. And then electronic documents such as PDF files or emails that are not accessible for them properly. For someone with auditory loss, there's issues such as face-to-face presentations and meetings. Things like video calls that we've become so familiar with over the last couple of years, and we're doing today. Consider having someone like our ISL interpreter to make them more inclusive for everyone. When you're in person, things like loudspeaker announcements, and just to make sure that when people are doing a presentation, that they're not covering their mouth with their hands or different things like that, because of course then it makes it a little bit more difficult. So there's also physical considerations. So that can also come back to your website, the layout and the accessibility of that. When you're in person, the position of signage, posters and flyers, things that are blocking access as well. And then if you have printed materials, how easy they are to maneuver. We're also looking at aspects of neurodiversity. So we would say to try and avoid complex use of language and sort of flowery idioms and metaphors, things like that, as well as complex data visualization, and just keeping layouts as clean and simple as possible, to make things, which actually makes everything clearer for everyone. So one of the key things that I want to get across is that we're talking about accessibility, inclusivity, but the things that we're doing today, they actually make things better for everyone. So it's not, this shouldn't be something that has to be considered, oh, it's an add-on, you have to go back and check your documents and do all these extra steps. What we would like to say is that once you have an understanding of some of these considerations, you want to just make it a habit so that it becomes part of your general process whenever you're creating, whether it's internal documents in your companies, promotions that are going up on social media, and all, anything that's going out for consumption basically by others, because our world is full of visuals and it's full of content. Content is key these days, but we want to make sure that content is as widely accessible for everyone. So I'm just going to talk about a couple small things, very broad range, but overall, one of the things that we're going to find out is that the elements that are available in certain things like software programs to add in some of these accessibility features, all of it actually is based around the good old-fashioned websites and HTML coding back in the day, because a lot of the elements that we're talking about have been taken from the way that we would have programmed websites, the overall base structure of the internet, and has been put into some of our software programs, whether that's Microsoft Word, whether it's and then even things like your social media applications. They're all using those same principles that actually underpin how we build websites. So it's quite interesting that we've taken some of the elements from web and brought them back into other areas and have made them quite useful. So one thing we're going to talk about is imagery. We have imagery everywhere we go. We're surrounded by visuals in our daily life. But when you're looking at, visuals give you a lot of content that, we don't want to leave people behind and say, you're just going to miss out on half the story, because if a visual is not described, then it's basically like half a page is blank to someone that might be using a screen reader. So what we use is called alt text or alternative text, which is basically it's an option in almost every program that's used to create content in any way. So it's in Microsoft Word, it's in PowerPoint, it's in even things like that I would use as a graphic designer, like the Adobe programs such as InDesign, where I use to create the toolkit. There is ways that you can, oftentimes it's just as simple as a right click on an image and it has a box where you can type in alt text. So this is really important, and this is done on websites as well. It was initially done on websites, but now it's being done in all sorts of different software programs. So what you want to do is you just want to give a short visual description of what's in the image. So we have this puppy dog on screen here. So we're going to say a small brown and white puppy stands on a grassy lawn, bright yellow light shines from the right-hand side. You don't have to write a sonnet. It doesn't have to be the most, long-winded description. It's just to try and have some context for everyone that's taking part and using your content, because otherwise they're missing out on a big chunk of the story. And basically, if you're using a program, any sort of software, it's as simple as going to Google and saying, how do I add alt text in Microsoft Word or in whichever different programs you're using? It's different, of course, between applications, but it's generally quite straightforward in most of them. So it's not difficult to find the option. And what we would say is just, this is something that we would really encourage people to make as a habit. Just start whenever you're creating a document, whether it's just an internal Word document that's going out to your colleagues, but you're going to put a couple of logos in it. So just click on the logos and just describe what's in the logos so that there isn't a loss of communication there if it goes to someone that is unable to see the logo directly in the document. We're going to look at some very, very basic considerations overall when you're creating, especially if you were working in sort of document-based or presentation-based things like PowerPoint, I think within the sort of the Office applications. So some of these seem like very basic things, but they're overall, good concepts to take into most things. So we're thinking about keeping your text size, your point size fairly generous so that it's easy for everyone to see. None of us want to be there squinting into a screen anyways. It's a good practice to have. One of the things that is critical for someone that's using a screen reader is that they're able to know what the hierarchy of a document might be, the structural components, because the screen reader isn't able to differentiate between when you have, say, text that's bold and a larger point size, and you've made it bigger because you want it to be a prominent thing on the page. What we would suggest to do instead of that is there's some built-in functions in something in for instance, Microsoft Word, where you can select heading 1, heading 2, heading 3, etc. So when you are laying out a document that has some information that's split into chapters or different sections, use those preset heading functions, because it means that a person using that document afterwards and reading it will get a much clearer idea of what is the important start of a section. And what they can also do is they can jump to certain areas if they need particular content in a document and they don't need to read the whole entire thing as one long stream of text. So different things like that. And that's also actually taken from the web and how HTML programming is done. It's called tagging. So but fortunately, for everyone's sake, you don't have to know any code. You don't have to know HTML. All of these things are now inbuilt into the software programs to do it for you. So again, any documents, alt text for images. And remember to do that for things like logos as well, because those are also images. So it's graphics and photographs. And then if you have a graphic that has text overlaid in it, but it's all part of the image, you need to include that text as well, because that's going to be lost in the image. Otherwise, it'll just be, it's just a blank square basically as otherwise. Using nice, clear, simple fonts. Don't get too fancy with the crazy wild display fonts. I'm not going to talk about my own personal loathing of Comic Sans, but there's different, just keeping it as clean and as clear as possible, and try to maintain some consistency as well. You might actually have a brand font that you use within your organization, as some have that set already. Adequate color contrast. I go into this quite a bit more when we're doing the full training, but basically just making sure that if you're using, say, text in a color, don't have something that's sort of like a mid-range to a light color on a white background, or vice versa. You want to make sure that there's enough difference between the darkness and the light to make things clearly legible. So that's just an overall consideration, and it makes it easier for everyone. And then things like text styling, like italics and all caps and underline, those again aren't designated by a screen reader. So while you're adding them in to create variety in your text, this is where we would say, like, try to use more the heading structure. You can use like the bullets or the numbered lists within that are specifically preset within something like Microsoft Word, rather than putting in your own bits and pieces. Like, it's just to use as many of those preset options, which are quite functional, but they actually allow you to have much more clearly defined structure in the document itself. So now I had this camel on all of our promotions for today's events, and I think some people are going, what is the camel about? So just to talk quickly about social media, because that's a huge part of a lot of our promotions these days, our marketing to our customers and to people that we want to reach with our message. So what the camel refers to is the hashtags that have become very prevalent across all social media, because hashtags obviously categorize information by topic. So it's called camel case in your hashtags, which is where you capitalize the first letter of each word if you have a hashtag that includes more than one word. And honestly, this makes it a lot easier for everyone to read as well. But what it does is it also designates the individual words for someone using a screen reader, rather than giving them an incomprehensible string of letters that are just strung together and are a lot harder to understand. So it's just a small thing, but it makes a big difference when it comes to the accessibility for people that are using your content. So just think about camels and remember that one whenever you're working on something for social sharing. And social media platforms are quite good in that they all now have inbuilt options for adding alt text to any of your images. It's of course slightly different in each one, but it's not too difficult to find for most of them. Certain ones might have a character limit, so just be aware of that. If you have a very complex image that you're sharing, you might have to be quite concise in how you describe it. Things like if you're sharing video content, it's really important to use captions. And again, a lot of your social media platforms, especially like Instagram, really good options for adding captions automatically. So it's not hard to do these things. It's just to think about that step, but it really does make a big difference. Think about, images that are flashing and if there's animated GIFs and things like that, just consider that they could be very problematic for some users. Also, then if you're sharing a graphic and you want to put text and images all together and not one nice graphic that's going out on social media, just keep in mind, like I said, you have to describe that entire graphic in full and all of the text that is included in that, because otherwise that message is being lost. So what I would normally say is keep your graphics more simple, less text, and then put the critical details that you need in the actual text of the post, because people, especially if they're looking at it on their phone anyways, it's not going to be that big. So it's not a time to write a paragraph of text, but it is also just a consideration for putting in the alt text afterwards, and making sure that becomes a habit forming thing. And then when you're sharing links as well in your social media, then make sure that whatever that is linking to is an accessible document or follow on from there as well. So those are just some of the very overarching tips, and obviously we'll be taking questions and stuff later. So if you have any specific things that you're wondering about, we can follow up with that. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm just going to stop sharing the screen now, and I'll throw it back to Claire there.
Great, thanks so much, Jess. And just to really reiterate what Jess is saying in terms of a lot of these steps and the practicalities, that once you start to engage with them, you see how easy they are to implement, and that they shouldn't be a kind of a second thought or a kind of a last minute thing to be included when it comes to a document, that it should be something that's in the process of creating it. And we should always be considering accessibility when we're developing out our communications. And what I've learned definitely from engaging with this content more and talking to Erin and David, who we'll be speaking to in a little bit, is that a lot of this stuff that we're asking around communications are actually very practical and actually just best practice when it comes to how we communicate with our colleagues or with our employees or with candidates at an interview stage, that it actually just leads to more effective communication within the team. So thanks so much to Jess for that overview of kind of the key design elements, and our training pack and the toolkit will support you more in that and kind of give a much more of a deeper dive. And obviously Jess will be here in the panel in a little bit where she can answer any questions if anyone might have, and specifically. So we're going to share a video now. David kindly pre-recorded a demo of what it would be like if you are using a screen reader and receive an untagged document versus a tagged document, because I think although it's great to have us here kind of telling you about the tips and stuff, I think to see the actual impact of inaccessibility when it comes to communication is helpful for us to really understand and to really kind of inspire change in this area. So you can pop it away there, Jess. Thank you.
So in this quick video, I'm going to show you the differences between an accessible PDF and an inaccessible PDF. And after I do that, it should be fairly clear as to why an inaccessible PDF is a bit of a disaster for a screen reader user such as myself. So without any further ado, let's take a look at my screen and I'll show you how it all works. Okay, so in front of me I have an accessible version of a document, and there are a number of advantages to having an accessible document for your communications. So if I go through this document in front of me, what you'll notice is that even the visual elements, which are usually totally inaccessible to a screen reader, are actually described because they have what's called alt text. And alt text is something that a screen reader can use. It's text that a screen reader can use to describe an image that it doesn't understand. So for example, if I go through this document,
blue illustration of an eye, image.
A blue illustration of an eye. A screen reader without alt text would have had absolutely no idea what that is. It might have tried to guess, it might have guessed a blue squiggle or just blue lines. It might not have known what that is. In fact, it's almost definitely not going to know what that is. But because this document has alt text for that image, it's able to describe it for a screen reader user like myself. So let's continue on through the document.
Visual, heading level 3.
So there's visual, it knows it's a heading.
Printed documents and publications, list start. Bullet, inaccessible websites. Bullet, images without descriptions. Bullet, electronic documents PDF, PPT, email, list end.
And there we're at the list end. So what you'll notice there is that it's reading through the list and it's able to know what the text is. There are no issues. It's able to read the screen just fine because that is text. It's not images, it's not data. It's perfectly accessible. Let's continue.
Blue illustration of an ear with radiating lines indicating sounds, image.
So that level of detail, much like the eye above, will be completely beyond a screen reader's understanding. It might, again, just see blue squiggles. It's not going to have a clue what that is. So that just shows the importance of things like alt text, like having your text be just text, and having everything sorted in order and just working. If we compare that with an inaccessible document, you'll see that it's a completely different experience. So let's hop over to an inaccessible document now and take a look at how that works. So now what you're seeing is basically the same document, but this is an inaccessible version of that document. So I guess this document is visually probably the same. However, to a screen reader, it is completely different. So you'll remember before that we were able to navigate through the document. It was able to tell us what the images were. It had descriptions, it had alt text. It was able to tell us when we were at the start of the list, when we were at the end of the list. It was able to tell us what were headings and what were just text. This version of the document is completely different. So if I just try and navigate, this is what happens.
Image, screenshot, communication various, visual, printed documents and publications.
So
inaccessible
I'm
websites,
not doing
images without
anything now.
descriptions,
It's reading
electronic
away,
documents PDF, PPT,
and
email,
I have
auditory,
no control over it.
face-to-face
It just
meetings,
kind of reads
presentations,
everything,
speeches, video or video call
whether
without
I want
captions
it
or
to or
ISL
not.
interpreter, loudspeaker announcements, people speaking with mouth covered.
So there, for example, it's reading the document, but you'll also notice that that's literally all it's read. I can't navigate. For example, I can't navigate to find the heading. I don't know where the list starts, where the list ends. I don't know what the alt text on the images are because there is no alt text. To me, this is just a document of text with no visual layout. The screen reader isn't able to interpret the visual layout because that hasn't been shown to the screen reader. So this kind of demonstrates, I guess, why accessibility for documents is so important, because when you can't navigate the document, imagine you're doing a presentation. Imagine these are your notes for your presentation. You might want to navigate bullet point by bullet point, but with an inaccessible document, that's completely impossible. Imagine getting all your notes at once. You can't, nobody can present in that way. So I guess this demonstrates why this is important. And yeah, if you have any questions, by all means, throw them at me, and we'll try our best to answer them.
That's great. Thank you so much, David. I'm actually going to invite David and Erin and Jess back on screen with me now. If you guys want to switch your cameras and mics on, thank you all. So just as a way of introduction, I want to introduce David, who just presented the video there to us for the demo. And so David works as part of the NCBI team, as I said earlier on. So he's digital content creator and technology trainer. And David, so thanks so much for the demo. And I was just wondering, from your perspective, from your kind of your professional capacity, what's it been like for you when you kind of receive that inaccessible documents and kind of the impact it has on your work versus maybe when you receive an accessible document, and kind of how that it kind of changed for you?
Sure. Well, yeah, it's interesting. First of all, thanks so much for having me. Much appreciated. Delighted to be here. And thanks as well to all the employers who are taking part in this as well, which is fantastic. So thanks so much. But to answer your question, I guess my background is in the radio industry. And as part of jobs that I would have done, something that I would have been doing on a regular basis is receiving press releases. And oftentimes, for example, you might receive a press release that would be a PDF. And it's amazing, you know, even massive organizations, government departments, you would be amazed the amount of inaccessible PDFs that are out there. It's not particularly uncommon. But you might receive, for example, a press release that's completely inaccessible. And that, from my point of view, it means it's impossible then for me to do that job, because it makes it very difficult, if not impossible, for me to write notes on that. And the issue isn't necessarily confined to PDFs. A lot of companies, you know, like you were discussing earlier on, they might post images to Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and those images might have all the information. For example, if you're organizing an event and you post a poster that has the date, the time, all that information, if that image doesn't have alt text, guess what? No screen reader user can work out the date or time of the event. So there are certain issues that both personally and professionally can prevent you from accessing critical information. And without information, we can't interact with the service you're providing, or we can't attend your event, or oftentimes purchase your product, because we simply don't know the information needed to do so, because our screen reader doesn't know the information.
That's great. That makes absolute sense. And I suppose, to touch back on what Jess was saying, that the practicalities of including the tagging and the reading order when you're creating that documents, there are only small steps to be included, and can have such a huge impact then on not only the individuals that you're sending the communication to, but then the potential for your event or your press release and how that's disseminated then out. So thanks so much, David, for your answer, and again for the demo. Really, really appreciate it. It's been
sure
helpful. I'd like to introduce Erin Fox, who is Senior Client Executive with Jury. Thank you so much, Erin, for joining us today. I suppose the next question I might ask you, Erin, if you don't mind, is what has been the impact for you on your professional life when it comes to inclusive communication, and how has it kind of impact for you on your day to day?
Thanks, Claire. Just to give you a visual description of myself first, I'm a white female. I am 32 years old. I have brown hair, glasses. I'm wearing like a dark red top, and behind me, there's a wall behind me that is kind of a dark grey. And while you can't see it, I wear a cochlear implant, which enables me to hear. So, and just before I answer your question, Claire, I just want to say to David, I'm in the business of sending press releases, and I am absolutely going to take on your comments about, you know, sending accessible press releases. So that's going to be my mission after this call. But in terms of like the impacts that inclusive communications has had on my professional life, I think that like when a workplace like makes inclusivity and accessibility front and center of what they do, that for me, that takes the weight of responsibility off me. Because like one of the issues that I have is trying to keep up with everyone else as someone who has profound deafness. And sometimes I can kind of bear that responsibility, trying to keep up instead of trying to get everyone else to slow down. So just by, you know, sharing my difficulties with my colleagues and with my employers, and telling them how they can make things easier for me, just makes things so much better, and that helps me work to my full potential.
And Erin, just off the back of that, like, what advice would you give to an employer maybe who's sitting here today? What would you say is the best way to bring inclusivity front and center, and to really show that their commitment to accessibility and inclusive communication?
I think be willing to listen, to learn, to adapt, and don't be afraid. I think sometimes if you meet someone new and they have a disability and you know nothing about that, there can be a little bit of fear that you might say the wrong thing, or you don't know what to say. And just be willing, have an open mind. Don't be afraid to ask questions, and more importantly, if you're asking questions, do that with intention of finding out what's best for them.
That's great. David, I actually might ask you the same question from your perspective. How would you like to see an employer, if there's somebody say on this call today, how would you like to see them kind of move in commitment towards this?
Well, basically exactly what Erin said. I mean, ask questions, reach out. There are organizations, you know, like from a Cyclops point of view, the NCBI, you know, if you're an employer, reach out. You know, there is an employment team here, you know, that will be able to answer questions. And maybe if you have someone in an interview who might have a disability, don't be afraid to ask a question. We're used to receiving questions, and we're also used to solving these problems. People with disabilities are basically fantastic at problem solving because you have to do it so often. So if there's a concern, don't be afraid to ask. We can answer your questions. We don't bite. So yeah, there's no need for there to be a fear around it. You know, a lot of times you can hear from employers that they might have a fear that, you know, reasonable accommodations in any way might, you know, as we discussed earlier on, that they might cost a fortune or anything. And oftentimes that isn't the case. You know, hiring someone with a disability isn't actually going to send your insurance skyrocketing. And that's a common misconception, but it doesn't happen. So it's, you know, it's okay to have these, you know, questions. It's okay to have these concerns. Just ask, reach out, and we can guide you to where you need to go. But as Erin said, do it with intention. If, you know, if you want to make a difference, it certainly can be done, and it's actually not that difficult, and it doesn't need to be a scary process. And there are people here who are more than willing to help you make that transition to become a more accessible organization.
That's great. That's a really fantastic point. And I think it's probably worth saying at this point that I know that NCBI are delivering training in this area as well. And so if anyone wants to engage with that, to reach out to Martina at NCBI, that they'd be more than happy to support. And I think as well, just to mention around the reasonable accommodation pieces, if you are an employer that's sitting on this call today and you're kind of wondering, well, how do we get support around reasonable accommodations? Employers for Change is obviously here to share information, and we can deliver disability awareness training, but there's also government grants and funds that exist to support employers in this area. And there's a number of different ones that you can apply for. If you do want further information on those, please do reach out to us at Employers for Change. We have information there. It's on our website, but if you'd like to ask a couple more questions, you can get us on our direct helpline number, or you can get us on info@employersforchange.ie. Jess, I might just ask you a quick question just around the practicalities around introducing inclusive communications. And I know that Michelle had asked a question around accessible PDFs and guidelines for staff on emails. And I was wondering if you might have any advice for Michelle on when you're kind of maybe starting out on this journey, if there was something that you might recommend.
Yeah, no, I mean, there can be a lot in it when you start looking at the various different bits and pieces. And I think the biggest thing is to look at who within your organization is creating the content, and whether it's internal documents or it's things that are going out to your client base or your potential customers. So you need to bring everyone along on that journey of further information about how to be inclusive in your communications. And that goes as well for, like, if you're a company that's engaging, say, a design firm to do a project for you, you need to communicate to them that you want to make sure that all of the elements of the project, whatever form that might take, are going to follow the inclusive communication guidelines and things. So, and that's where hopefully like our toolkit will be useful to people. And, you know, and then if you want to get into specific programs in terms of how to use the different elements, we can get into that a little bit when we do some of the trainings and things. But I think it would be good to, it's just looking at who within your organization is outputting the content, and to make sure that they are part of those trainings as well, so that it's not just the decision makers, or maybe like we would often deal a lot with the recruitment teams when it comes to Employers for Change, but maybe you need to look at the communications folks, or even like your social. A lot of companies now would have a social media team possibly, and to make sure that they're incorporating those accessible elements in everything that they're doing, so that you're not kind of missing. Like you could have good accessibility in some aspects, but then there could be other parts of the organization's communications that are missing some element. So it's just to try and make sure that everyone is up to speed at the same level, and especially those people that are going to be producing the most of your content. So yeah, and we will be holding our own, you know, further inclusive communications trainings as an option for companies, so they can get in touch with us and we can go through that in a little bit more detail as well.
That's great. Thanks so much. I know we're getting closer to time, and we're kind of getting close to 12 o'clock, so people might be trying to dip off for lunch, so I don't want to hold anyone too late. But I suppose, Jess, what I might actually ask you very quickly is, from a personal point of view, what's kind of been your biggest learning in this area, and something that maybe you hadn't realized before?
Well, there's a lot of things, because, you know, I mean, I'm not going to say how many years ago it was that I was in design school, but none of this stuff was discussed back in those days. But all I remember is from when I was learning how to program websites and different things is the content, like alt text and headings and all of these different things that we were using as part of HTML. And now seeing how that's translated into the different programs that have adapted those functionalities to make their to add that as an option for users is quite interesting to see how that has developed. And there's just, you know, as the world develops, and there's different applications all the time, there's new social media platforms, all that kind of stuff. It's just interesting to see how some of them are really taking accessibility and making it front and center, so that it's more obvious, like if you haven't used alt text, or if you haven't brought these considerations along with you. So it's good to see that there's there's an increasing awareness of it, but we obviously want to see a lot more of that. And then we want to see people putting it into practice. I just saw there was a question there about using an automated alt text generator. I haven't come across any. I know that like when you input, say you place an image in PowerPoint, it'll come up and say, it makes a stab at it. It's pretty far off usually in terms of what the actual image is. So unfortunately, at this point, it is a case of, describing things yourself. And that's where keeping images simpler is going to be your friend. The other thing is if you're posting something to multiple social media platforms, write your alt text once, copy and paste it into like a text document, and then you can just use it across all your different social media. So you're not having to re-describe the image each time. Like there's things like that can, it does take time to incorporate these steps, but there's ways that you can also save a little bit of time as well.
That's great. Thanks so much. And Erin, just for the fact that you're in the communications industry, and this wasn't, I hadn't kind of taught you discussion, but I was just wondering if perhaps you had kind of any thinking around how things could evolve and progress in that area to ensure that the industry is coming along when it comes to accessibility and inclusion as well when we are developing our communications.
Is that a question for Rika?
Yeah, sorry. Yeah.
So it's Harry. Do you mind repeating the question?
Yeah, no problem. So
that's a reasonable accommodation, a good example there, repeating the question.
Perfect. Sorry, probably my long-winded question. I suppose I was wondering from a professional point of view, you're in the communications area every day, you're kind of engaging with different forms. Is there anything that you can see that would be great to see change that we could all start to commit to today?
Yeah, I think the main thing is learning the value of slowing down. So like I work in the PR and communications industry, and it's very, very fast paced. So there is an element of trying to keep up with everything. And that can be particularly difficult if you're someone with hearing loss like me. And but just going back to what you said earlier about like a reasonable accommodations, it doesn't cost a lot to make these differences. It's just about developing a habit. So it could, an example of developing a habit, it could be, I don't know, say if and this is for any PR agency, if we're working an event, that can be so fast working at that. And sometimes when it comes to like sharing messages, if a client sharing a message with us or us sharing messages internally, there can be passing a message on with the intention of, I need to get this message across and then I need to rush off and do the next thing. But it's about maybe changing that intention and thinking, okay, I need to share this message with someone who's deaf. I need to make sure that they hear every word I say so that they can go off and do their job effectively. And then that benefits the team as a whole. So, so yeah, it's overall, it's about slowing down. And I do think I'd like to see, accessible PDFs for keeping screen readers in mind. That practice coming in more, and I'll always be an advocate for closed captions. But just on captions, I think with some events, like live events in particular, I would like to see more people getting live captions on a stage for people in the audience who have hearing loss. But getting live captions that can't be automated captions, because it's like you were saying, Jess, about having like an automated alt text and PowerPoint. It takes a stab, but it's not best. And I often joke that like captions on Zoom, they're deafer than me because they just get so many words wrong. But just like an issue with that might be, having like a stenographer at an event, that's such a specialized skill and it is expensive. So that could be a topic for discussion another time.
No, it's a really, really great point. And I think as well, during when we were in lockdown and stuff, everything was online, and now we're moving back to this in-person model, and to consider how we bring the accessibility from online events into in-person to make sure that everyone is still being included while we're back in person events, and hopefully they continue, that there's not going to be any more lockdowns or anything. David, we're going to be wrapping up now in a few minutes. I just want to see, do you have anything you'd like to add just on the back of what we've been discussing today? Make sure that I haven't missed anything.
Sure, yeah. I mean, just my advice to anyone would be to just take one small step, whether you enable alt text reminders on your company's Twitter account, or maybe you ensure that maybe you subscribe to, for example, a captioning provider for your YouTube videos. We're all putting out so much information now in so many different forms, whether it's across social media, whether it's through the post, whether it's in-person events. So find one step that your company can do to just make your stuff that little bit more accessible, and it will get noticed. It will be noticed. And once you start taking the first steps, people will notice and they will help you take further steps. So just do one little thing and try and make it a habit. And from there, you're on a really good journey that will make the world a lot more accessible.
I love that. That's such excellent advice. It's so practical and it's so intentional that today, if everyone on this call chose one thing that they can make a habit in the next week when it comes to accessible communications, the knock-on effect would be incredible. I've just had a question, David, from an individual who's wondering, do you have any suggested free caption providers?
Free caption providers, captions now wouldn't be my strong point, I'll be totally honest. I know that a lot of video platforms, for example YouTube, will do captions for you. So if you upload a YouTube video, a bit of advice that I would give is, before you make that video public, upload it as an unlisted video a day in advance, because what that actually does is it lets YouTube actually generate captions on its own. It's not perfect, but the advantage is, you're looking for a free solution, right? So it will give you captions, and you're basically just allowing YouTube time to do the work in the background. So that's the way we did it today. We uploaded that video earlier on as an unlisted video, and it works. It's an easy way to do it, and it only takes something being done a day early. It's not, realistically, the video is probably, if you're uploading it, it was probably done a day early anyway.
That's it. That's perfect. And I'd even go one step past that. And one of our colleagues, Employers for Change, always recommends that you can copy and paste the subtitles that YouTube has generated into a Word document, and you can kind of have a quick edit down through, if somebody's name maybe didn't come up correctly, maybe they misspelled David's name, that I can correct that within the captioning, and then you can put it back into the program so that it works, so that the captions are as accurate as possible. So yeah, it's great. That's great advice, David. Jess, I actually do have one question that I might throw to you, if that's okay. And I think we probably do mention it in the toolkit, but somebody has asked, do you have a list of don't use colors? And I know we talked about different blues and stuff, but you might give us a little bit of an example, if that's okay.
Yes, and I can see where they're coming from with this, because with most companies, you have a brand, and you've paid a lot of money to develop this brand. And so within your organization, you probably have a set of colors that you're supposed to use for everything, and different style, you get like a style guide from a designer that's developed your brand for you. Now, I have to say, designers can be some of the worst people for this stuff, because if they're not thinking about accessibility, they're thinking about what looks nice, or what's this conceptual thing. And sometimes it's not the most legible, easy to read kind of thing. And they're going, oh, but we have this color palette and we really like it. And you're like, yeah, that's light blue on white and nobody can see that. So at the end of the day, sometimes there has to be a discussion within your company as to, okay, these are our brand colors, but we need to maybe have some secondary colors that we can use that are a little bit more visible. And I know that question mentioned yellow. Yellow can be a tricky one because obviously it's not just the color itself, it's the lightness and the darkness of the color. And I go into more detail in that in our full training, basically. But yes, you have to have enough contrast in a color against whatever the background is in order for it to show up properly. So sometimes you need to get a little bit creative in how you use your colors, and then keep to more simple things when you're putting that into the content. And sometimes there does have to be a discussion with whoever is doing your branding, whether it's in-house or whether it's an external outside company that you're working with, to say, look, this might look really fancy and nice, but it's actually a bit complex and it's going to be very difficult for people to read. Or, you know, sometimes designers can be very fond of that very thin, fine text that's, oh, it's very stylish, but like, it's also half invisible. So we have to move beyond some of these aesthetic considerations sometimes that are seen as quite innovative or whatever. But we, you know, at the end of the day, if you can't read the text, and if you're missing out a portion of your audience that can't read the text, it's not communicating properly. And that's, you know, that should be your full goal at the end of the day.
Absolutely. That's great, Jess. Thank you so much for that. Dave, I just have one more question I popped to you before we let everyone go for lunch. It's just somebody was wondering, would you have advice around a good free screen reader that they could use to perhaps test documents, to make sure that when they are putting documents out there that they'll be able to check them before they do so?
Absolutely, yeah. So it depends on what type of device you're using. All the main platforms have screen readers built in, actually. So if you're a Windows user, there's the narrator. You can search for that in your start menu and it should be automatically installed. If you're using your phone, on iPhones, it's called VoiceOver. It'll be in your settings. It's called TalkBack on Google. We can throw these in notes after the meeting if people want. And there's a good, a really strong, high quality free option on the Windows side as well, called NVDA, non-visual desktop access. So there are loads out there, and we can give you some notes on those that you can use to test your documents as well. But the only thing I'd add to that, get a screen reader user to test it as well, if you can find someone to test it, because they'll be able to give you advice that is, you know, for an average someone just who isn't using a screen reader day to day, they mightn't be familiar with, you know, the quirks that some screen readers have. So see if you can find someone to test it. Talk to NCBI on that as well. But there are, just to briefly answer your question, yes, there are tons of screen readers out there that you can use for testing. So, and we'll give you some notes on that after the meeting today.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much, David. We will send out an email to everybody we'll have a recording of the session. We'll have the toolkit, obviously, and any of the kind of advice and tips we'll have in bullet point form as well in the email for anybody who might want to read through them. I'm going to wrap up now if there's no more questions. I just want to say a huge thank you to both David and Erin for agreeing to come online with me today and doing this. I really appreciate it so much. You've both brought such a level of expertise, and the information and advice has been so practical that I know everyone has learned so much today, and I just really, really appreciate both your time. I just want to say a huge thank you to my colleague Jessica as well for engaging with this and for all of her advice around the design elements. And of course to Vanessa, who's our ISO interpreter here on screen, who's done a fantastic job, and it's so nice to have her. And of course to all of you who have attended today's session, we really appreciate that. And I just want to once again reiterate what David said. Let's have a call to action at the end. What is the one thing that we can all agree that we're going to do to ensure that our communications are accessible to everybody, and that we're creating an environment that is more equitable and inclusive of everybody? So whatever that is today, I'd really encourage you just to kind of have a think and think of that one small step that you might be able to take to ensure that we are providing and putting out inclusive communication. So I just want to say a huge thank you again to everyone for taking part, to my panelists here who are fantastic, and have a good day, and we'll get that email out to you with the toolkit before the end of this week. So thanks a mil, everybody.
Thank you.